This is Susanna Magenheimer, also known as Random Artist 222. This is my project video for Shawn Petite's creative design team. Please note, this is my extended version, slower and more detailed video, because I'm demonstrating lots of techniques. So please feel free to use the fast forward button on areas that you're comfortable with. Let's get started. These are the products that I'll be using for today's video. And the theme of my piece is thankful for fall, because I've waited all year for the cool, crisp weather to return. The beauty of these products is they can be varied to your personal taste. You can go with whatever you want, and this is just to give you an idea. First off, I'll be using Ranger's brushed silver paper for use with alcohol inks. It has a coating on it which allows the alcohol inks not to bleed through and allow you to get great effects. So I'll also be using an embossing folder for texture on the project. I'm also going to be using Deco Art's crackle paint. I have a wide selection of colors that I'll be using on my project. Again, variation based on your taste is totally okay. I'll also be using Shawn Petite's collage packs that include a lot of this weathered wood photography and totally gives you that feeling of fall in black and white and in color for different effect. I'll also be using a bunch of Shawn Petite stencils. This one happens to be wallpaper. This one's fall leaves. This one is pumpkin variety, and it's an awesome stencil for the technique I'm going to show you. I'm also using her Mandalas stencils, as well as the new Farmhouse pictures that come in 2 sizes and with their masks, and pine cones for a great background effect. I'm going to be working on hard canvas pre-gessoed board. I also like to add my own layer of gesso to help smooth the tooth of the canvas even further. This is a brayer. They come in lots of sizes, and I'm going to demonstrate jelly plate basics. These are monoprints created from a jelly plate. There are several brands out there. Test drive the small versions, the 3x5s that all of them sell, so that you can see what works best for you. Please note, it's best to use cheap paints, especially when you're starting out practicing. And I love using copy paper, even now, to create these effects. These amazing monoprints using Shawn stencils works beautifully for this technique with the jelly plates. As you can see close up, you can see this beautiful duck egg paint that I used. The red browns, the copper, to create an amazing effect using the jelly plate. There are 2 variations. You got that traditional I just showed you and a darker, more moodier piece. You also get the reverse effect using this stencil. And if you can see here, the detail that comes out is just fabulous. The imagery captured, and we're looking at here more of a traditional pumpkin. You can see the wallpaper stencil that I use coming through beautifully to give these pumpkins texture without actually using texture. There's a benefit to using these shapes is that you can cut them out and use them as you need. Now, I'm not saying that I'm an expert on jelly printing. There are lots of people out there who do amazing tutorials, but it's a fun process and I wanted to share that with you. You start with very little paint, and you want to select a couple of colors to give you some variation in the first pull that you're going to do. You do want to make sure when you're rolling this out that you create a thin coat. Any excess I'm putting off onto that paper towel. I'm now applying the wallpaper stencil, and my goal here is to use some tissue paper and remove as much of the paint off the stencil portion as I can, because that is where I'm going to be adding paint to create the effect. You can see close up here how I've removed the paint. And you can pull back the tissues as you're doing it and make sure you catch as much as possible of the paint. Now I'm going to pull off the stencil, and you can see that there's open areas. The stencil is in there, the detail of the stencil is in there. You sometimes can't see it. And I'm drying it a little bit. I don't want to dry it out a lot. I just want to make sure I'm not making mud. And so now I'm going to add the third layer, and you're working, or third paint, and you're working backwards on this. So if you hold up your jelly plate, you can kind of see what it's going to look like. Again, you want a very thin layer of paint, so any excess I'm pulling off onto the paper towel. This paint also reactivates the bottom paint so that you can make an amazing pull. So, and you do not want to dry out the paint completely to the point of, leaving it there for an hour, because it'll be hard to pull off. So now I add the next portion of the stencil, which is the pumpkin variations. When I apply the copy paper now, this pull will give me the separate pumpkin silhouettes that I showed you earlier. Make sure you rub hard to get as much of that paint onto the copy paper. And look how beautiful this pull is. Again, you can see all the detail of the prior stencil in there, creating that amazing looking texture. I love that flower in the wallpaper. Now you end up with the leftover, and again, here you're working backwards, and you have paint that is almost dry, if not just starting to dry. So now this is where you would add, in my case, I'm adding buff acrylic paint to pull the remaining paint off the plate. But you could also add any other color, because it's not going to interfere with the colors that you see there right now. So you could add purple and make your pumpkins purple, or teal, or whatever you want to do. Just make sure that it's complementary to what you're trying to achieve. And again, you don't want to put a lot of paint on here. You just want to put enough to reactivate the layer that's already started to dry. And again, you want a thin layer. And you make sure not to grind the brayer into the jelly plate. You want to really have a light touch on this, otherwise you'll move what you have below. And now I'm going to be doing the pull. And again, rub hard. I start from the edges and work in. And as you pull up, you can see that it's already onto the paper, so you know that it's working. And just pull it off nice and slow. If you see any paint that's still attached to the plate, you can redo it and pull it back up. If there's paint left over on the bottom, not to worry. You can pick that up with more paint in another pull, or you can use a baby wipe and take that off. But look how beautiful this is. And it can be used in a journal or torn up and made into background pieces, whatever you want to do, but it's just yummy stuff to work with. I love jelly printing. Now I'm going to be using the Farmhouse pictures to create a faux tin effect. They come in 2 sizes, and they also come with their masks, so you can utilize them in a multiple of ways. I want to capture a vintage patina for the tin, so I try to create a little bit of a rusted effect on the outside edge. I used the embossing folder, as you can see here, to create that pitted, dented, kind of banged up picture you find in an old farm barn, something like that. And I did this all using alcohol ink. So since I have this out, this tin can patina, I want to show you something. What I did was, in order to get that shape, was put the paper, once I had put the alcohol ink on, underneath the stencil, and I traced it and basically just cut it out. And that's what you see here. And in this case, I'm using one with alcohol ink pearls. It comes with experience to know which ones will work with which. And more importantly, like for example, this is an alcohol pearl ink. And so it's got some mica in it, but this one, the mineral especially, really can take over the color that you're doing on here. So you want to use that really sparingly. And it's, like I said, it's a matter of practice and getting used to it. The other thing I did to this is I found an embossing folder in my collection. This one happens to be a Doris, but use whatever you want, what you have handy. And I put it through the embossing machine. And as you can see, the impressions are really deep and beautiful, but that's not the look I'm going for here. So what I did was I put a second piece of paper. So when I ran it through the machine, I put the paper in. And then I put a piece of paper on top. So it won't be as much pressure going onto the embossing folder. And what I ended up getting was this. Can you see that? It's just, let me put the other one next to it so you can see. It's like night and day. So this is with, you know, just the regular pressure on it. And this is just with that one sheet of paper, I was able to get a lighter impression. So now it comes to the matter of just coloring this puppy up. What I'm going to do is start out showing you how to do this. And I'm going to use some mushroom alcohol ink color and just put it on there. This stuff dries really quick, so make sure you know what you want to do when you start. And again, with alcohol inks, you got to play. This is pearl alcohol ink, which means it has some mica at the bottom, so you need to shake it up before you apply it. This is in smolder, and it has a kind of green tarnishy effect that I thought would be a great accent to creating the tin effect. I'm now going to add mineral, which is also a pearl, so I shook it up, but it also, based on experience, it's a color that will dominate the other colors, so use it sparingly. And now I'm just going to begin to pounce, and this is going to create what I call the foundation layer for the tin patina effect. And I'm going to add a little bit more mushroom because it's not quite dark as I want it. So now I'm going to pounce that out again. And alcohol inks keep reacting with each other, so the more you pounce and play with it, the more interaction you get. I'm quite happy with this for the foundation. Now what I'm going to do is add the slate color of alcohol ink and with some blending solution, which actually dilutes the color, and I'm pouncing that in, and it's interacting with that base layer. How much of a patina you want depends on what you're looking for. The more you play with it, the more it interacts. So pick a point where you want to stop, and that becomes your tin patina. And this is where I'm at right here, that silvery goodness. So I'm using a 9x12 pre-gessoed hard canvas board. I also added a second layer of gesso to smooth the tooth of the canvas down even further. Shawn Petite sells MDF board, which I love working on. It's a really hard wood substrate, and this will do in a pinch. So I gather up lots of textural elements for consideration in my pieces. It doesn't mean I'm going to use every single one. I'm going to be using some drywall tape that you see here. I'm also going to be using some die cuts, which I'm going to be discussing later on in more detail, but they are gessoed. And I have also some leaves that I prepped for the piece, as it's a fall, thankful for fall piece. This is some of my stash from previous Gelli print pulls. It's really fun to Gelli print on book paper. I also have deli paper. This is some crackle deli paper from prior projects. Here's a cool Gelli print that I did on sticker paper, and I'll show that later. But here's just some more of my Gelli print stash. I just bring it all out that I feel matches colors and moods. This is some of the textured board from Shawn Petite's collage packs that I found would work really well with my Thankful for Fall piece. The two colors I have in black and white and in color for a different effect. And my focal images would look like they're sitting behind some boards. So that was a consideration in using these photographs. And here's, instead of just using paper, I use sticker paper. And as you can see down here, it just pulls off. And that's how I did my pull. And it works really well. So another consideration for using Gelli plates. So now I'm going to start tearing up my papers and putting them together. So now I'm just laying out where I want to glue everything, taking a snapshot, and now I have my map so I can go back and glue everything down. So this is my final glued down background. And as you can see, I've added some other textural elements like those die cut leaves on the right. I've also added some die cut hexagons which reminded me of beehive. And I've also added some drywall mesh for additional texture, and at the bottom I've added it as a shelf to have my focal images sit upon. And I've also added some texture paint, and that's more like an impasto paint or a very thick paint that allowed me to get some more texture. So I went ahead and started painting and forgot to turn the camera on. My apologies for that. But after I glued down the leaves and the other die cuts using my Prima Planner glue pen, I went ahead and started applying the paint. The colors of the paint are listed in my description below, but I used some strategy. After the texture elements were added and they had dried, I wanted to make sure that I used a yellowish paint over what were the beehive elements and the wax, and then I used some more turquoise color to emphasize those areas where I already had turquoise underneath. And then I used a green to add to the whole spectrum of, you know, nature, green, leaves, that type of thing. Because I used matte medium to seal everything before I started painting, I was able to pull back colors. So those papers that I jelly printed, you can actually see them to effect, and I planned it that way because I didn't want to lose them completely. And just because you apply the papers to your background and then paint all over them doesn't mean you have to hide all of them. You want to have some of them peeking through if that's your preference. Like I have some of my board popping out behind my pumpkin to make it look like it's in a natural like a barn element to it. So now you see what happened with that missing video footage, so you're up to date now and we can proceed. One thing I used when I'm painting on something like this is this acrylic glazing liquid satin. I like the satin because it's not shiny, it doesn't leave a glossy look on the paper, and I usually use about 50-50 to the paint to the satin, and it gives me more play with it, and also I'm able to pull color off without having too much problems, plus the fact that I applied the gel medium first, so I created a non-absorbent surface, which then allowed me to go with a baby white and pull off color, kind of like this. So so that left me with what you see here, and I put my focal points back on here because I just wanted to get an idea of how everything looks. And as you can see now, I have this focal piece that pops out, and I have this background piece that's kind of all over the place. So I need to tamper this one back a little bit. But before I do that, I want to show you up close these areas right here. Yeah, these guys here. That's, those are raised. There we go. Those are raised areas, so when I put my final coat on here, it's going to catch in all these nooks and crannies. Now, I'll do a little quick demo of how I did that, which is basically, since you missed it, I just basically did this. Okay, let me take this off camera to open up because, or there you go. One trick with these guys, if you get them, is lift it up really slow and then scoop all that, because it gets on the lid and you end up with a funky little mess. Okay, so this is actually Buckingham binding. The color, I used vintage lace, but let me just show you. So to create all that little goodness, I just put it on my palette knife and I just started to do this. See how that starts to look? See how thick that is? You could do this with it. That's how thick it is. And it's not going to come off the bottom. So, but you create the ridges that you want. And then I had my leaves glued down first, but this stuff's so thick, I could just probably put it in here like this. And there you go. And then one other effect I might do, which I did on the other one, is just, oops. Bring it onto the leaf a little bit. So it's like the mud or the dirt or whatever you want to call it came onto. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how I created this crackle effect on this pumpkin. And let me turn it this way so you can see even better. Really simple. I showed you earlier how I created these jelly prints using Shawn Petite's pumpkin variety stencils. And what I did is I just cut them out. So in this case, this one was this, and this one was the really bright orange one that I showed you guys earlier in the results. So what I did was cut them out, and there are two things going on here. One is, and I'm going to use this to demo it. When I want to put mediums or paste or whatever onto something as delicate as copy paper or very light cardstock, and even heavy cardstock, to be honest, I always get what's called stencil board or the back of cereal boxes, basically the same thing. And I glue on the pumpkin to the surface, so then it's on a nice substrate so that it's not going to buckle around too much. You're always going to get some buckling, so be strategic in how you put maybe things to weight it down, okay? And with crackle, the fun thing about it is once a few hours go by and you start seeing the crackles appear, you should just let it go through the night and let it do its thing, but I have to play. So as things start to crackle, I just start doing this kind of thing. I'll show it this way, just very lightly bending. What I'm saying is once you get some substantial crackle showing, it helps get that effect that a lot of people on Instagram were getting really jazzed up about when I showed a close-up. And I don't know if I can show it on this one here, but if you look towards the edges, let me see if I can get this right here. If you look toward these edges, there's teeny tiny little crackle framing, and then the big crackle in the middle. And the way I get that little teeny tiny crackle feathering is by just, like I said, when it's almost finished crackling, I sit there and play with it a little bit, and it creates these little these little bursts of crackle in the mini crackle. There it is. You can see the mini crackle on that edge. So that's how I get that effect. So I'm going to show you how I did this. I'm going to use this though and show you that what I did on this half of the pumpkin was put matte medium. And on this half of the paper, I don't have anything. And remember, this is copy paper. This is not watercolor paper. So you have to be very, let me reach for some paper here. Hold on one second. Water. You have to be really cognizant of that when you're applying watercolor, because it's just going to saturate that paper. So you don't want to put like a really deep coating of watercolor in the beginning. But the beautiful thing about the matte medium side is that you can use stuff like markers. My favorite are these Faber-Castell Pitt Artist Big Brush Pens. This one happens to be chromium green opaque. And it takes just a tiny bit of practice to get used to something like this, but the way I got these deep greens, let me get back here for a second. The way I got these deep green ridges in here is by using the marker. So I just started out here and then, whoops. So you can start to blend it out. So you get the point, right? And you can do the same thing with watercolor, but again, you need to really make sure you saturate this baby. And you want to do this before you put crackle on. You don't want to do the crackle obviously after. So let me get some, these are just some Prima watercolor sets in tropicals. And I'm using the deeper green in the set. Just spraying a little watercolor, little water. get a paper towel going here and water my brush, and then I'm going to bring it back here. And right now I'm going to do it on here so you can see. If I pick that up, that's pretty heavy color, right? So I'm going to water that down because I don't want my watercolor to go on that heavy. I want to start really light. So if I start here and bring it in, and I can get that effect. And then I can come back in with the with maybe just a tiny bit of the heavier color and drop it in. And it's never going to act like watercolor paper, but it will pick up. Now the interesting thing here is too, that's acrylic paint. So that acts as its own little resist. So if I get any on the paper, any on the acrylic paint, I can pull that back. But where there is, because when you're jelly printing, you're going to get areas that in between have little no paint on it. And so if you get the paint caught in there, you're not going to be able to pull it back. So that's another way to do this. And I actually started that other pumpkin using watercolor, and then came back with the marker to add some more emphasis to it. Okay, so that's how I got that effect within the pumpkin. And then, so you can see how I got the effect of the crackle, as you can see here. I went ahead and did that, but I need to show you how you apply it, because it's a little trick of mine. I don't know if other people do it, but it's something I've always done. These are my stunt doubles, as you can tell. I use Distress Crackle Paint in Clear Rock Candy. One thing I never do with this is mix it. Hold on a second. Here's a little trick for you guys who are watching. I can't get the lid off. Husband's not home. So do that. And it comes right off. So, one thing, like I said, you don't want to shake it or stir it up because you'll get bubbles and that messes up the crackle. And also, if you have a bottle of this that's been sitting around for months or even a year, test it on a piece of paper first. Don't put it onto your beautiful project and then go, it didn't crackle. Make sure, always, do a stunt double, make sure it crackles. Craft paints, craft stuff have expirations, and if you haven't opened it, I would still, and it's been around for a year, I would still test it. Like I said, this is a product that you worked on hard and you don't want to mess it up. So I'm just going to demo here in the middle. I'm just picking it up with a Q-tip and get in close. I can get in close, and I'm just picking up a gob of it and just bringing it over and making sure that I have a cohesive layer. So I don't want a lot of, like, let me show you right here. I don't want a lot of this. Oh, maybe that's not gonna pick up on the camera. Yeah, see all the ripples? I don't want that. I want it nice and smooth. So I'm gonna bring some more. And I'm using the light from my window to see how that's applying. And then, okay, so the top then is nice and thick. I'd say like a millimeter, a couple millimeters. And then what I do on the ends is just feather it out. It will crackle, but not really deep crackles, but it'll continue that effect so that you can have some continuity with your piece. So if you let, like I said, if you let that dry overnight, let me close this right away. And always close your products because that's the best way to keep them from expiring too fast. Nice and tight. I'm going to put this aside. Overnight, this is how it crackled. Using that same technique. And the reason you're having a hard time seeing it is because I haven't done this to it yet, which I'm about to show you. So for this, I have this little tool. It's the newest thing everybody's crazy about. These lifestyle brushes, I think they call them. I'm sorry, I forgot the name offhand and they're not on the brush. But they're wonderful. And they come in different sizes and you can find them on Amazon. Tailored Expressions has a nice set of them. But what I like this one because it's teeny tiny. And it's just what I need to get into these crackles. So I'm going to go in here and start. See how let me see if I can get closer. See how the crackles start to appear? And the more I put on, the darker that's going to get. I'm trying to be careful, and I'm watching the light here, that I don't want to go beyond the crackle, because then I'm going to start, you know, shading the actual pumpkin down here, and I don't want to lose that color. Now, you might be going, but I don't want it that dark on the top. Well, you don't have to have it that dark on the top. What I'm doing is applying as much as I can into the nooks and the crannies with this little guy, which is why I love it. And you can see that I'm doing that. And then you can come back with a baby wipe. Okay, you see how dark that is? And I'm going to pull this back now, the top. So now when I go in, you can see all that really cool crackle, right? And I don't have a problem. I just want a little bit more like that. So you can go back in there and highlight it the way you want. And that's how you create the crackle effect that you saw in my project. Let me get in there really close one more time for you. And that's it. Okay, so now I'm going to show you how I created this effect here with the leaves, making them look like they're inside they're in the dirt. And these are what's called die cuts. And let me show you what goes on with that. So my weapon of choice is the Gemini Junior. That's what I use for die cutting. And if you've never used a die cut machine, they're all different. They all work different ways. And it's a matter of finding your perfect match. But these are what die cuts are. And this one, for example, is from My Favorite Things. And they are very beautifully etched so that you get the veining in the leaves when you use just enough pressure in the die cut machine. And what I did is I used these in my project. So what happens is with the die cut is, in this case, the Gemini, for example, you use the sandwich. They tell you exactly what sandwiches to use. Sandwiches means which plates, how. And you would put this down like that. You put the substrate that you want to use, put the cover plate on, and then you would run it through the feeder, in this case, of the Gemini. Why I like the Gemini is it's automatic. And the other thing I love about the Gemini is that when you put it into the slot, if this sandwich is too big, it will not accept it. And it will, as far as I've heard and know, and with my own experience, it won't accept the sandwich if it's too big, and it won't jam up. That doesn't mean it never will. I won't promise that for any die cut machine, but I have loved working with the Gemini because if it likes the sandwich, it sucks it in, takes it through, and ends up giving you a die cut that looks like this. What you see here, okay? And what happens is you just come in and you pull them off. And you get such detail in these guys. Look at this. Look at the veining. You see that? Yep. Look at that veining. Look how tiny. That is like a millimeter little stem on there. And the other beautiful thing is when you cut them out, and that, by the way, that die cut, I don't have it handy, but I could snip it through so all these pieces are individualized, and you can create your own stencil per se, right? So that you can go and stamp over it or do whatever you want. And in this case, what I did to create those effects is, depending on how much shadowing, highlight effect, whatever you want to call it. In some cases, I took this and I put it on top of this one, and I used my favorite gluing system for these kind of things, which is a planner glue pen from Prima. It is, they all have colored tips, but they do not, the color doesn't come off with it, as you can see there. It dries clear and it dries hard. What I mean by hard is it just does a fantastic job of holding everything together. And I can do this. And normally I would do this on top of a piece of paper because I don't want the glue to get on my craft mat. It'll come off, but it is a gel-based, oil-based glue, I believe. And as such, I just don't like all that stickum to go onto my craft mat. So I take it off to the edge. Like that. And it gives you a little bit of time to play. So I'm going to line it up. Seal it up. If you use this on paper, well, obviously paper. If I were to glue this down on this piece of paper right now, and then, you know, a few minutes later want to pull it off, it's gonna come off, whatever's here is gonna come off with this leaf. It is that strong. I just love this glue pen. I wish if Prima, you're watching, please make a bigger one. Anyway, so that's one effect you can get to get more dimension. Another way to get dimension with your leaves is to put one like that, and then another one over it like that, and just keep them, you know, the original die cut thickness, right? So they're just one piece. That way they overlap nicely, and when you glue them down, they're going to meld really well. You can see that right here. That's what I did here on this one here. Let me see how close I can get. So when I put the burnt umber underneath it, you can see how beautifully it took the shadowing, and also how it went into the veins as well. So now I'm working on some of my focal images, which includes this pumpkin, which my husband took a photo of, our Halloween pumpkin this year, and then we printed it out and cut it. I'm kind of playing with the different pumpkins I'm going to use, and the one that you see there with the crackle effect was from a Gelli print, but I'm working on this pumpkin first, and what I want to do is give it a little zhuzh. So I'm going to add some of the deli paper that I use to remove paint from my Gelli print, and I'm going to apply it directly onto the pumpkin. I'm going to glue it on both sides. I should say I'm going to glue it on the pumpkin and glue it on the back of the deli paper, because the more glue I can apply to this, the more that it soaks into the paper and allows you to get a transparency, which is what I'm doing here. See how transparent that is? So I can see the ridges of the pumpkin below it. Also sealing it by doing that. So now I have my focal images and I have my background, and you can see that they're glaringly different. So, but I want to see how the focal images sit on it. So now what I'm going to do is the scary part, which is adding the antiquing effect. I use golden acrylic satin glaze, basically for me almost a 50-50 ratio. And that's burnt umber that I'm adding. And yeah, don't mix with a brush. Use a palette knife. I was just lazy here because more of it ends up in the brush than you want. So now I'm applying it to the collage, and I'm wiping it back with a baby wipe. And again, wiping it back is based on your own taste, how much of the background you want it to show and not. And this is a completed piece. And as you can see here, it tamps down all that glaring paint that I had put on earlier to this beautiful beehive wax effect that I was trying to create. And look how it got into all these nooks and crannies, just gorgeous. The leaves look like they're embedded in dirt, like they're on the forest floor, which is the effect I was going for. I love those pops of turquoise that you're seeing here, and some of the papers below still popping up. And I carried this theme throughout the piece. So I'm just walking you through now the whole panel. Again, that beehive wax effect. I have the mesh there as a shelf for my focal images to sit upon. So now I'm bringing back my focal images, and you can see the dramatic difference when you add that antiquing effect with the paint to where I had it before with that glaring green, yellow, blue paint. And I'm just placing my focal images so I can see if there's anything else that I want to do or need to do. You can see too how the die cut leaves are so effective as a tool in mixed media art. So now that I'm feeling like I have a balanced piece now, the background is in the back, the focal elements are up front, but there's still a little bit more that I can do to make this even more effective. One of the things I'm going to do is add some shading to bring my focal images back out a little more. I'm going to stencil in some leaves. So the first thing I want to do is add some edging to add some dimension to my pumpkin, and I'm using archival ink in sepia, and I'm just going to use a brush and apply it to the edges. Okay, so now I have my focal images that I put back on here. So I'm looking to see where I can add anything to this without sending it over the edge. I like this. I was thinking about doing crackle on these, but I think I'm gonna pass. But what I wanna do is, one last thing. Shawn has these stencils, and she has the leaves in two sizes, so you get this guy and you get a big guy, and this guy and a big guy. So I'm using W+9 in 3 colors. Okay, I'm just gonna use this finger dauber and so now you can see I have this little leaf here for like some subtle color. So I'm going to add a few more. So now you see that I've added just enough color pop where it's not overpowering, but it lets your eye move from place to place throughout the piece. So as you can see in the final shot here, I've added shadows using my General Charcoal Extra Soft Pencil in 6B and the word thankful using a die cut along the border of the pumpkin. So I hope you enjoyed this video and that it inspired you. So please remember to subscribe and like. It really helps. It gets my videos seen more on searches. So thanks for watching and hope you have a great day.